Trickle in. So, hey everyone, happy Friday. We're letting some people trickle in. I'm joined by the wonderful Paul. How's it going? From
Doing
sunny
well.
San Diego, though
I gotta admit,
probably.
it hasn't been so sunny lately. It's been our worst spring in a long time,
Um,
gotta say.
what's the temperature like there? They're about now.
It's been like high 60s.
Wow, that's great.
So it's great relative to other parts of the country that might be either boiling or still cold and freezing,
Yeah.
but all of California has been cold. Like our slopes are gonna be open till
Mm,
July. In the
jeez.
mountains, we've got like Mammoth that's gonna be open till July just because they've had so much rain and the weather's been cold enough to keep the snow around. So those that love
Yeah.
snowboard and skiing, we're your spot. For those that want great, warm, sunny weather, right now, not so much.
Could probably use some more like global warming. I mean, right now,
Yeah.
um, I'm sweating a lot because yesterday was
Is it
in
pretty
the
warm over there?
90s, which is
Oh,
hot. And today's like a high of like 89 or something. And the northern people, because of the relative short duration of when it's this hot, which is, let's just say, June, July, August, and parts of September,
you're not
not
used to it,
everyone,
huh?
well, just not everyone's equipped with like infrastructure. And so we have a
Yeah.
nice
AC and
window
whatnot.
window AC unit, but it doesn't really reach too far in the house, and I have to keep the office door closed. And then there's the lighting going on, and I'm just like, so I'm all iced coffee here, and then my water is just a big thing of ice cubes.
Blob of ice.
So
I gotta admit, it's an inexpensive spring and summer in the sense that people aren't really putting turn on their AC, not really even turning on the
mhm,
heater. It's not cold enough to turn on the heater, but it's not warm enough to hit the AC. But it's the evenings are definitely like a little uncomfortable to be hanging out outside. And
mhm.
so, oh well, yeah, we're spoiled. 69, and we're
Yeah.
complaining.
Well, what's funny is high of 88 today. Tomorrow a high in the mid 50s, I think. Just deciding to be a lot colder tomorrow. And
You
just,
guys just want to like crack glass over there is what you're trying to do.
yeah,
All right.
just expand, contract space.
Exactly. You're just trying to crack the sidewalks and glass, and
Hmm.
bones while you're at it for those of us aging.
Yeah, I mean, some of that has more to do with like falling and breaking your hip, although that might be too topical of a reference this week. Um, let's not get too
Too
far into
relevant
politics,
this
though.
week.
Yeah,
uh,
the the memes are good though.
the memes are amazing. What was the one that I saw? It was a photo of him climbing up the stairs to
Hmm.
like Air Force One. Um,
Hmm.
gosh, what was the meme? I'm going to remember before the end of this podcast. I'm going to look it up. Share
Definitely,
with the audience.
probably my favorite of those. My two favorite ones are he's taking the spill, and then you have Joe Rogan there interviewing him.
With the mic. Yeah.
Yeah, and then the other
The clip
one,
from like,
yeah,
as if he's inside of the octagon.
yeah, and then the other one is him like you know getting like a home run, like doing the baseball slide down in the infield. It's just like it's great
Leader
humor.
of the free world.
Yes,
Leader of
it's
the free
great
world.
humor, and the situation deserves all the mocking it can get. But I do feel bad about the individual in question. That I think that he deserved a better golden years for his life, despite everything else he's done in before
I'd
then. But
say he put himself in that situation because no one forced him to run for president. I don't think.
well, that's
Maybe
where it
someone actually
gets.
put. Maybe someone held a gun to his head to run for president. I don't know, but generally speaking, I doubt that happened. So he
Yeah,
chose to put himself in the public eye in a mental and physical state where that will be criticized.
yeah,
Your
it is.
choice.
It's
So
pretty crazy. All right,
yeah.
let me
All
see
right.
where are we with people? Yeah, we're a few people watching. All right, let's roll the intro officially and then get going. Here we go. All right, so hey everyone, officially, how's it going? Happy Friday. This is the Digital Cash Rundown, and I'm joined by the one and only Paul Puey of Edge, as it says clearly on his shirt. How's it going, man? Happy Friday.
All good. Doing well. Thanks for having me again, Joel.
Yeah,
Looking forward to some of these topics.
absolutely. I always look forward to double podcast day because I got the Dash podcast immediately after this, and now people have conned me into doing a Twitter space immediately after that. So this is like 3 to 7 p.m. of like solid shows, and it's gonna be interesting.
Yeah, it could be fun. I save them for Fridays. I feel like that. I love ending my week with some podcasts. I think we've pretty much gone on live on mostly Fridays.
Yeah, it's kind of like work but not work at the same time. For me, it's definitely work because I have to like host the thing. But
it's like hanging out with friends. I know you make it easy for us. I just kind of click on a link and just start yammering.
Yeah.
I gotta like get the camera on and whatnot and some lights, but other than that, you make it easy. So I thank you for that.
Well, no problem. It's always a pleasure. And if anyone's in my Discord, you can go to the Digital Cash Rundown channel and type in some super chat stuff to leave stuff in. And so that'll be a good time. But before we get started on the first big topic of stuff, I saw something else that I just thought was funny. Apparently Robinhood when they're listing their crypto assets, they list Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash under a subcategory of Bitcoin family, and just okay. But
your prefix with Bitcoin, you suddenly get put into the group.
But
Bitcoin family.
It seems like the maxis are losing it over this. There's some people.
Oh, I'm sure they. Absolutely.
What is this? What is this Robinhood?
I know.
All the
laser eye maxis.
Yeah, and it's like, I mean, it's literally a fork of Bitcoin that has Bitcoin in the name. It's not in a Bitcoin.
I mean, I agree. They should put Doge, and they in a way they should put Doge and Dash and
Litecoin should be there for sure. Yeah,
Litecoin should be there for sure. I mean, hell, while you're at it, just throw BSV.
Do they have BSV on Robinhood though?
I don't think they have BSV. I don't know. BSV has been tough, and let's get like a little less sarcastic and whatnot. There's like one guy on our team. If he's listening, Sam and I have been. Keeping an eye on BSV on a technical front, and I'm close with some of the big promoters. Rafael Laverde, obviously, right? And, he was a big BSV guy. Now he's kind of like a medium BSV guy, mainly because Bitcoin suddenly has kind of big blocks, sort of, right? With ordinals and whatnot.
Yeah.
And I value the attempt that the BSV community has been making. I'm not saying it's passed yet because they're still making attempts at kind of seeing the upper limits of blockchains. I think it went a little bit too far because we're seeing infrastructure just having trouble keeping up. Right? It's actually hard for us to run, not necessarily nodes and nodes can run, but typically speaking, when you're wanting to talk to and query blockchains, you just don't want to talk to a raw node. You want to talk to servers that index the node and provide information out of a database that makes it easy to query, right? Not just raw data. And so that's the infrastructure that's kind of breaking down these databases that index blockchain data on BSV. And so we've actually not had BSV functioning for the past several weeks because of this. And so that is, an inherent challenge. Like, we don't want to delist BSV. We want the community that builds it to, keep trying what they're doing, just so we know what the limitations are. And I won't say that I'm going to be super bullish on I'm not super bullish on BSV, but I value the effort and the attempt. So. But maybe they went a bit too far. I think blocks in the chain are a bit, not a bit, probably a lot bigger than they should be, and to make a usable app.
Definitely bigger than they should be at this stage of scaling for the kinds of traffic and user base and the profitability. For a million things too big. I wouldn't say absolutely too big, but for 4 million things too big. But I do like that, for me, BSV and Nano are in similar camps in that they decided to just optimize for a single variable, I guess, and then just run with it. Like Nano's instant transactions, no fees, and then let's see what happens. And then BSV is Bitcoin basic model and as big as possible, as much big blocks as possible. And let's celebrate when the blocks are gigantic. It's actually a party. Let's throw a party when we get a bigger block. But I mean, filling a drive full of data is not hard. It's not something to necessarily celebrate. The celebration is when that still allows the protocol, the network, the apps, the exchanges to still function. Then you can celebrate. And I think at the time they were celebrating because things were kind of still functioning. But it seems to have kind of hit its limit with current hardware. One of the biggest criticisms of Bitcoin is, hey, hard
hard drive space, SSDs, memory, CPU, and bandwidth have over 10x since Bitcoin's launched. Why is the block size, the same? Or, arguably with ordinals, why is it 4 meg instead of 10 megs, since we've more than 10x all of those metrics in compute power? That's the criticism of Bitcoin. On the BSV side, it's like, hey, we've only increased, by 10, 20x, yet you're 100xing the size of the block. You're just making it absolutely gigantic. I think it's even more than 100x.
Yeah.
So that starts to, that's the opposite side of the criticism, where you've exceeded Moore's law, whereas Bitcoin has ignored Moore's law. And I tend to be kind of the middle ground person. I think you've talked to me. I tend to try to sit very center, and it's not a popular opinion because no one's, no one's a fan of what you have to say. Even just what I said right now, BSV camp's not going to be happy with what I said. Bitcoin camp's not going to be happy with what I said. Maybe the Bitcoin cashers would be, because they're kind of in that similar middle ground.
Yeah.
But by and large, you alienate everybody. But yeah, everything is a balance. Technology especially is a balance. You said you can't just tweak for one. Right? Like the nano community said, this makes super instant, fast, free transactions and disregard everything else. You just can't.
Yeah. I mean, you can, but you have unintended consequences. And what I like about that is others can learn from your unintended consequences, both positive and negative, because there's both.
Yeah, that's what I appreciate about what BSV has done is, they are trying to push the limits of layer 1 large block scaling. And they have implemented things to help scale the block, allow nodes to be able to process very large blocks. Bitcoin Cash has done that as well. And they've kind of found some limits there. So I appreciate that. Does it mean that it's a platform that I would use for my own, store value in it? Not at this point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway,
well, yeah,
diverged
a little bit, but that's fine. We can hit on this first of all the stories, the big one for the day. Binance to delist privacy tokens in France, Italy, Spain, and Poland. Binance users in France, Italy, Spain, and Poland will no longer be able to buy or sell 12 privacy tokens starting June 26th. And some of these tokens are Monero, Zcash, obviously, but then they included stuff like Decred, Dash, Horizon, Pivx, Navcoin, Secret, Verge, Firo, Beam, and MobileCoin. And that's quite an interesting list.
MobileCoin was a private coin. I mean, I know it's MobileCoin, for those listening, is the coin launched by
or for Signal.
For Signal, correct. Although I don't recall if it actually had any privacy features in it. And Signal being a very privacy focused app, it would make sense if it did, but I forgot whether or not it had any privacy functionality.
I'm pretty sure it did. I never looked into it too much because I just knew that some random coin no one's ever heard of that Signal's like, you got to pay with this. I just, I've already figured that was going to be like Libra or DM or whatever, just not going to go anywhere. But it's kind of an interesting collection.
Yeah, the other ones have at least tiny nuggets of privacy at worst. But
definitely, in some cases, very tiny.
Very tiny. I'm actually really curious. You're very, very closely tied within the Dash ecosystem, and I know a lot of people, and we implement Dash, obviously. So, but I don't know of many people using Dash with its privacy functionality. And to my understanding, its privacy functionality has nothing to do with the coin itself and the protocol, but primarily it's a wallet feature, which is kind of the same thing as saying that Bitcoin's a privacy coin because you can use CoinJoin. And do correct me if I'm wrong. I do want to make sure I'm stating facts here as opposed to just like what I recall. Yeah. And so it's only coin mixing, to my understanding, is what Dash offers. And that is not at the protocol level. Maybe I think the master nodes might help coordinate the coin mixing. Is that correct? Yes,
there's a few things that make it as part of the protocol. It's largely a CoinJoin implementation. However, it's coordinated by different master-owned quorums, so it's much harder to take down. And there's an interesting feature where mixing transactions are zero fee, meaning you're not for example, if you're trying to do a big mix with something like the Whirlpool on Bitcoin, then you're going to be spending those awful transaction fees to mix. Whereas the actual mixing fees themselves are kind of discounted at the protocol level, and also, one of the big problems with CoinJoin is you have doxic change, which a lot of wallets kind of have ways of sequestering. But in Dash, when you use private dash transactions, there's no, all the change gets burned, all of it gets spent, so you have no like leftover change to kind of compromise your stuff. So it's kind of like an advanced CoinJoin kind of thing that does have some protocol
Okay.
level
I'll give
kind
it
of
credit for that
improvements.
then.
And
That nugget of the fact that the master nodes coordinate it, then I'm like, okay, I would call it at the protocol level then.
yes, and Decred have recently, like last couple of years, implemented a CoinJoin plus plus, as they call it, a CoinJoin implementation at the. I don't remember exactly what at the protocol level helps, but I do think that they have some sort of a protocol run node that coordinates everything or something like that. But there's some core. It's in the core wallet, and it's some base protocol level thing. Obviously, you got like Zcash. No further explanation required. Horizon, as far as I know, I don't know if they did yet or they're going to remove privacy from the base layer and only do that on their side chains. In which case, if they did that, then it wouldn't make sense. PivX, of course, has zero knowledge proofs. I barely ever heard Navcoin mentioned, so I know nothing about it.
Yeah, I don't know anything about
Secret
Navcoin either.
makes sense. Verge is hilarious.
Secret's like actually funny. Secret, if anything, is the one that government should allow because it basically has a backdoor. It's the government's like effective dream privacy coin. It's much like the internet and encryption back in the 90s when encryption was getting widespread and the government wanted to ban it unless you put a backdoor into the encryption implementations. That was the condition by which they were going to allow it, or at least that was a proposal that at least the US government was pushing. And Secret is effectively that. I'm sorry for any of you guys that have Secret and are big fans of it, but it has a major kind of vulnerability backdoor that compromises its privacy. And basically Intel themselves could know every single transaction on the network.
Yeah.
Like if they
It's got
wanted
a
to.
secret
Intel
backdoor.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yep, exactly. That's what's so secret about it, is that it's got a secret backdoor. And then Intel could be compromised by the government, say, please, Intel, run this node that lets us see every single transaction on the network and all the addresses and blah, blah, blah. And Intel could. So it's ironically the one that they probably shouldn't ban if they want to catch the bad guys, quote unquote, catch the bad guys that happen to be using secret network, of which I'm pretty sure there are none. And so anyway, yeah, getting back to your list, Secret, not one of the better privacy coins.
Yeah, but then skip it to Furo, which does have some pretty good privacy, right?
Yeah.
Beam,
similar to Zcash.
Beam, which has Mimblewimble. As far as I know, it also uses Lelantis that Furo kind of. It kind of is a dual system, and then Monero obviously, and then MobileCoin probably. But now I'll go back to Verge. So as far as I'm able to know, Verge started branded as Dogecoin Dark. It's a Doge fork. And as far as I know, it has no transaction graph privacy. The only privacy improvement from what I've heard, again, I haven't done a deep dive. If there's some Verge maxis out there, please let me know. But as far as I know, it's just like IP address obfuscation type things when broadcasting transactions. Which
is definitely not protocol level at all. Any wallet can implement IP address obfuscation.
Yeah, as far as I know, there's literally no transaction graph. Like if I send Verge from me to you, everyone can see it, just like Dogecoin. So
right.
It's hilarious because Verge came out of sort of nowhere to pump when it got added, I believe, to Pornhub. Was it Pornhub? It was one of those adult sites. And the funny thing is, Verge is kind of it's a French word for a naughty bit, and so it's kind of like it's the biggest joke on this whole thing, and the fact that it's just still around in this privacy context
and it got crazy.
Banned. Yeah, but so based on this collection of things, what do you think are the criteria they're using to kind of ban these things? Because it doesn't really make sense, right?
I think it's some guy within. They consulted some cryptocurrency quote unquote expert and gathered a list of what they deemed are popular enough coins to be remotely recognizable to the community that have any nugget of privacy, any small little nugget of privacy preserving pieces, generally speaking at the protocol level, right? Although, like you said, Verge barely. And I don't think anyone's going and looking deep into the actual protocol, what it does. It's a coin that has or had provided some type of marketing around privacy seems to be what really was done. Like, I don't think anyone did any technical deep dives into white papers or actual source code. It's probably more around the marketing, is what it seems to be. Interesting thing that I like to ask is, what's the ramification of this? Like, what do we think this is going to do to kind of the grander crypto ecosystem, privacy coins in general? And as we've said many times, like, what happens when things generally get banned? Do they become in some ways more valuable, or does the banning actually work and it just kind of pushes
it
things out
tends to work because like no one can get
infringe?
drugs anymore.
Yeah, no one can. I've definitely never had access to a drug that was banned. So yeah, and it doesn't cause society to get more violent in any way, shape, or form either. So as far as drugs, but one interesting ramification of this, because this is, remember, it's not specifically that, hey, the reason why we're talking about this isn't that the EU has kind of banned privacy coins, is that Binance delisted them, right?
Yes,
Due
in
to regulatory
certain EU
concerns
countries.
in certain EU countries, which is probably a reaction to, rightfully so, EU regulations. But I think you led with this, and I think a tweet that you put out there, Joel, that this really just drives people into solutions that, generally speaking, cannot get banned.
Oh, is it time for the tweet? Here we go. Let me put that up on the screen.
Where's that tweet, right? You got to put it up on the screen.
Yeah, there we go. Now it's up on the screen. So it said, basically just, there's an announcement of this, and I retweeted it. It said, stuff like this is why I view Thorchain and the Maya protocol and any other workable DEX as crucial to crypto survival.
Right. Yeah, we definitely need these DEXes up and running, and more importantly, now as it starts to get more hostile, we'll need the DEXes to be far more distributed. And I think even the team over at Thorchain knows that. I mean, like, they're not quite as quote unquote decentralized or distributed as needed to be far more resistant to government takedown. And I'd probably agree with that. Understanding, like, we implemented Thorchain, we understand what it took to implement Thorchain, we understand what kind of infrastructure was necessary, or at least what kind of infrastructure was needed to make it far, far easier to get implemented. And yeah, there's some centralized infrastructure in that. And so both the foundation of Thorchain, its developers, and then also Nine Realms, which is a key for-profit company, are pretty key pieces of the infrastructure of Thorchain. And until we get other companies and entities and individuals kind of running infrastructure, it probably won't be a truly hardened enough to resist a government takedown, or at least a government temporary takedown where the protocol is still running, but maybe you don't really have any apps being able to access the network, right? That I think is one of those key things. You need enough different apps and different people running infrastructure where the government doesn't even bother. They're like, well, we could try, but we're only going to cut off one head of the 100-head hydra, right? That's the end goal. So we need that as well. In addition to your tweet, we need those DEXs to be far more distributed, decentralized than they currently are.
We need them to fulfill their original mission. And someone, when I mentioned these two, chimed in something about the incognito chain, which also lets you kind of swap stuff like that. Like, why don't you mention that more often? And my answer was, first of all, it's technically not 100% cross-chain because it's like a CryptoNote based thing. So it basically uses Monero style, decoy privacy. But in order to swap, say, Dash for Zcash, I'd have to wrap it and then get a wrap token and then unwrap it. So I'd have to swap Dash for P-Dash, swap P-Dash for P-Zec, and then unwrap the P-Zec and get real Zec out the other side. So because
of the wrapper a centralized wrapper, or is it?
No, I mean, it's their own network, right? It's their own like Monero forked type thing. And I believe they're the bridges from, the asset to the wrapped asset or whatever. I can't remember if they were fully... I think some of them were trusted and some of them were not trusted. But I know that they're working on this concept of progressive sort of decentralization, where in the beginning, like the core team ran like about like half the nodes. And then with each like iteration, it's just like, no, that's protocol level, by the way. It's not just the core team happens to run a bunch. It's like core team, like half are run by core team, half are by anyone. And then with each progressive version, they've done like a smaller portion is explicitly centralized. But because of that, like as we mentioned, like I think that Thorchain is, structurally fully decentralized, just in practice, maybe not yet.
Yeah,
And
no,
so,
exactly. All protocols are very decentralized. Just about every protocol. It's just, are they almost, not all, but most are very decentralized at the protocol level, but just not at the current state of the network. Like, what is the current state of the network? How decentralized is it? And that's true also of Bitcoin when it launched for the first couple of years.
yes.
Satoshi was a lot of the nodes. He was 100% of the miners on day one. And, it's going to be true of a lot of other currencies. One could argue that many of the currencies are actually more decentralized in a shorter period of time than Bitcoin was.
Probably
There's more interest. There's more interest in. Everyone's heard of these cryptos, and everyone's like, "Oh my God, it's a hot new crypto. Let me go and mine it. Let me go and be a validator." Whereas when Bitcoin launched, nobody had their eyes on it, right? And so, I think once again the laser-eyed maxis probably have to be a bit more forgiving for chains that are fairly new. And you're right, they're not as decentralized as Bitcoin. Fair enough, but if given, say, 5 years time, they're worse off than Bitcoin was in 5 years, now we've got something to complain about. Like, okay, well, maybe you're not attracting enough interest into your infrastructure.
And by the way, in the YouTube live chat, Archer Bullseye chimed in. He says, yes, that's correct. Incognito is slowly moving over to all untrusted bridges, but I think some are still trusted. So,
okay, cool.
Yeah,
I see Archer also was earlier on laughing about BSV, and I get it.
Yeah.
It's easy to laugh at.
Yeah, there's always stuff to go around. But as far as like the DEX thing, that does kind of bring up an interesting sort of talking point about. I remember when it was a Tornado Cash incident, which, by the way, I was happy to see Alex Pertsev in person out of jail a couple weeks ago at ETH Dam. Hope his case goes well. Fingers crossed. But because of that, I remember Thorchain a lot of the Thorchain community got really cold feet about listing anything that could be considered a privacy coin, and it ended up being not as much, kind of a little much ado about nothing. But at the end of the day, there's still this idea that we need to decentralize before we're too risky with this. We'll have other protocols. And that's why I hear a lot of like the Thorchain people talking a lot about bare metal. Oh, we got to run bare metal nodes. Like we got to run not like AWS. Yeah, not that kind of stuff. Which is great.
Which is great.
And
yeah.
So as far as
expensive, it's tough.
Do DEXes
cheaper in the long run, expensive in the short term.
Of course. But it's like, do DEXes solve the problem of these kinds of delistings? And so in the immediate case of Thorchain, no. In the case of the Maya protocol, like as of today, also no. As of
hopefully in a week
or in a couple of days, then you'll have Dash on there, which is one of the less, I would say, of that list. By the way, probably in the
least private,
not necessarily, but not. I mean, definitely not far from the bottom of that weird list. But as far as the ones people think. Zcash, Monero, and then like Firo and other things like that are very, very much like that's their primary purpose. And so you kind of get that
private, able to be. I mean, I guess the way if for those of you listening, understanding like how are we rating the privacy of these coins? I think there's like a general set of features that aim to privatize. I guess you could say make private a part of the transactions and balances. And at the very high end, Zcash, Monero, Firo, they make private the recipient address, right? Like if you're using the private mode of these coins, obviously Monero is private by default, so you're always using it. Zcash and Firo, could be private, but they make private the recipient address using a technology called stealth addresses. They make private the sender addresses using either coin joint-ish things like mixing and whatnot. And then they actually make private the amounts. All right. So all three combined make for insane level of privacy. And I think that's what people generally think of when they think of a privacy coin. Dash, on the other hand, only makes the source of funds private through the mixing. But at the end of the day, when you send a transaction, you kind of still see, who received the funds. You see the address of who you received it to. Now you can just mix your funds ahead of time. So therefore, where your funds really were becomes obfuscated. That's really what CoinJoin gives you. And you can see how much is being sent. And from what I can tell, it's really kind of those two categories is what we primarily see. It's full, all three features enabled, or primarily just CoinJoin, and by and large, nothing else.
Yeah.
There was at one point you said there was IP address level privacy, which is basically you connect to Tor, maybe Tor
And you
plus
can
a
run
VPN.
a lot of things over Tor,
Oh, exactly.
like
You can run
Bitcoin.
pretty much everything over Tor. Yeah, definitely every cryptocurrency that I'm aware of can run over Tor. And so Tor, maybe Tor plus a VPN gives you basically IP address level privacy. It has nothing to do with the protocol. And so getting back to what were we talking about, like the delisting,
Yeah, but the DEXes.
and
No,
the DEXes or
I
what they're
should give.
supporting.
First of all, one thing that's conspicuously missing from that list is Litecoin, because Litecoin has Mimblewimble extension blocks, which,
True.
from my understanding, again, I have to go a lot deeper of a dive on this, but I would call Litecoin as significantly more of a privacy coin than Decred, right? Because
Yeah, for
Decred
sure.
has as far as I'm aware, has a much more simple CoinJoin implementation,
CoinJoin.
at least as far as like the protocol is concerned. Whereas
It's just the one of the three. It's just
yeah,
CoinJoin. It's
but
mixing
because it said
both
something,
address.
but because they talked about adding that a lot, and Mimblewimble is sort of like a side, like it must be a branding marketing kind of thing that got that, or because I don't know why else, or maybe it was, well, we know Dash is a privacy coin because of Dark Coin, therefore,
Right.
oh, Decred does the same, so I don't know what the thinking is that excluded Litecoin, but where Decred does come into this is some of the Decred developers build this they call Decred Dex, which, as far as I know, is going to be rebranded at some point, but it's just like an atomic Dex, right? And
Like atomic swaps.
yeah, that kind of thing, and the
Ugh.
and the atomic it's not quite as smooth as what we're used to.
Terrible UX. Atomic swaps suck. They're just
Yeah,
they're not for production use. They're for people to tinker and you go, oh, that's cute. We swapped.
Yeah.
I swapped some Dash for Decred.
nice.
But
Well, you're going to trigger a lot of people by saying that, but that's fine. Yeah, truth is
I already
truth.
have.
But-
Yeah.
But so Decred is kind of you on the Decred decks. You can swap Zcash for Decred for Monero, and I think they're working on Dash too. And so yeah, if you're into that, you can kind of do that. As far as I know, the Atomic decks by Komodo, which I think I don't really keep up too closely with that, but they might be trying to implement some like AMM features. But as far as I know, it's
Last time I
still
remember
looking
chatting
something
with
like that. Yeah.
last time I remember chatting with the Atomic Dex folks.
Mm-hmm.
They were entirely atomic swaps.
Probably
And so
still.
AMM features would be a complete departure from atomic swaps, is my understanding, which would be great if they wanted to implement that. But then you're basically going down the path of a Thor chain
Yeah,
at that point.
which I think everyone will
I
have
haven't
to.
seen I haven't seen any proposals for a cross chain Dex. They fall into two camps that I've seen. Pretty much an AMM Dex like Thorchain, similar to maybe slightly different architecture underneath. Tweaking some knobs and dials, but not vastly different. Or it's atomic swaps. Those are the only two I've ever heard. And atomic swaps, not a single one has seen the light of day with any level of liquidity or utility because of the user experience. And I'm totally fine with people creating new versions of like a Thorchain. And there are some coming out built by people in like the Monero community. And so I think it's a valiant attempt, and I like the fact that Maya Protocol exists because they're able to support more chains. Like Thorchain nodes can only support running so many nodes of various protocols. So it actually is an interesting way of scaling Thorchain by just running a completely separate network that has different chains. Now, if you want to go from some small chain on Thorchain to some small chain on Maya, it's 2 hops, right? You're not going to be able to do a single swap, but at least it's possible. It's not unlike a lot of fully centralized order matching exchanges like Binance, where you don't have every single pair in the world. All right, you still have to do a couple hops, and so that's fair, and it still gives us a more self-sovereign, a distributed, and a self-custody way of getting into and out of the various privacy coins and coins in general.
Yeah, of course. Well, and that's the when you have dexes like this, it seems like for the masses, you got to on ramp somehow to crypto. You got to buy it, and so you could buy, let's just say, a Litecoin or a Bitcoin or something like that. But then all the banned juicy assets, you can just go plug into whatever your favorite DEX front end and go get it that way. And we can't do it in Latvia. We'll turn on your VPN, and then guess what? You're in Mexico. Bam, there you go. You just got it. And so it is going to kind of the thing that annoys me about these sorts of delistings, other than it's FUD and FUDs affects markets, etc., whatever. The only thing that annoys me is that it makes it harder for businesses to accept and use them in commerce, right? Because it's if you're the local Belgian fry stand or whatever, and you want to start taking Zcash, how are you going to go sell that for things unless you have some sort of an automated thing where it just auto swaps via Thorchain to something else, which auto sends to your Kraken account, which has an auto bot that it just becomes a little bit more tricky for that kind of stuff to happen, and then it kind of reduces the network effects of those cryptocurrencies for white market commerce.
So you're right, it does do that, but I think as DEX has become much more highly liquid, much more efficient, that's okay, because if you're trying to sell your crypto into fiat, you're basically doxing your fiat, or you're doxing the fact that you have this rough dollar fiat value that you're putting into a bank. So it going through a kind of transparent cryptocurrency is fine, because who cares that you haven't really lost any additional privacy. And I'm all for building systems that can obfuscate that additional layer that's needed. Like if I have to receive Monero, and then in order for me to go and get it into fiat, well, it just gets kind of behind the scenes swapped into Bitcoin or ETH or even USDC, for Christ's sake, right? And then it goes into a bank account. That's entirely fine, and I'm excited that the DEX actually could make that a much more seamless experience. One that doesn't require the liquidity of a centralized party, once again, I love these companies, they've been amazing for us, but doesn't require the human decision-making process of an instant swap exchange, such as a Change Now or Changely, Godex and whatnot. And so be it, bring it. You want to force people to have to go through the transparent, we can still enable the more private coins to be utilized in commerce. I mean, they'd have to fully ban not just the exchanges, but say you cannot hold and you cannot send privacy coins in a country before then a merchant says, okay, well then, all right, then I absolutely can't. But otherwise we can build tools around it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, about the privacy thing, might as well hit on the Monero thing, because that was interesting. So here I'm sharing this thread by Anon Industries, which is a company that lets you buy stuff privately, but also is a very pro Monero account, a very Monero first kind of thing. Anyway, there's a privacy bug in Monero for the last 3 years, how blah, blah, blah. Basically, there was a decoy selection bug. And of course, this thread goes into a lot of detail on exactly how everything works. But it says, more specifically, this is a bug in RingCT's decoy selection code that made it ignore 10 block old decoys. And so basically, there was a certain amount
decoys were very recent.
Yes. And it says the total amount of transactions that suffered from this bug was around 2 to 6% over the last couple of years. And so, people who spend their Monero as soon as they were able to, let's say if you waited 11 blocks instead of 10, you weren't affected too much, for example. But so, there's been a bunch of these kinds of things that have sort of happened over a longer period of time with Monero. I kind of have sort of lost count of how many of these. There were a few where, for example, if you used there was a while where I think it was a 30 to 40% chance that the first decoy that was used, the first transaction would be the real one and not a decoy, for example. Then there was another one with, if you respent your funds immediately, then instantly the first one would be the real transaction, etc. And there was a bunch of little parameters, and then bugs that have been kind of fixed over time. And this is just kind of the latest one that got patched, and hopefully things are a lot better. But before I go into a little mini rant, I'd like to hear your take on this whole thing.
So I just came from Monerotopia. I got to hear like
Mm-hmm.
panels with actual Monero core developers and their thoughts, and the history of Monero, what changes have been made and what are upcoming.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the biggest topics of conversation was what they're calling, I think, full uh, full anonymity based on the full participant anonymity, which means that the decoy set is basically everybody that is using Monero, which is basically Zcash, basically introducing ZK snarks into Monero.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the biggest complaints, like when they actually had this question for the core devs, what was the most annoying and most challenging thing that you worked on in Monero? And I think of the 5 people on stage, 2 people said decoy selection. Like they
Yeah.
specifically said that they said it's super tricky, it's error prone. There's not a great answer. It's always like you're just kind of trying to figure out what's the best, but there's not like an algorithm that you just simply follow and it's the best, right? You're
Mm-hmm.
just trying to hide inside of the haystack. And so they've recognized this as being one of the biggest challenges, and hence it actually is one of the biggest reasons why they're pushing for full set anonymity, which is effectively like ZK snarks or Starks, but Zcash level privacy, and it is coming. And that's probably what now
Mm-hmm.
excites me is that it definitely is coming. It does require some more drastic changes. One of the changes that I think they had talked about is that people will have to now have new addresses.
Mm-hmm.
Like, are they going to be able to? There was, I think, a way for them to roll out the change and not require new addresses, but require a huge set of changes that could be put at kind of categorized as very high risk, or
Mm-hmm.
they could just kind of rip the band-aid and just say, okay, well, sorry, you're going to need new addresses now, right? Um, and so what do I take out of this? Yes, it's one of the hardest problems to solve, this decoy selection, and do it correctly, and not have any exploit leaks inside of it. Um, but it's not a team like Monero team specifically. It's not a team that just says, it's still pretty good. Deal
Mm-hmm.
with it. It's still we still haven't had massive discoveries of people and their transactions getting found by the government and whatnot. They're not looking at it as like something to brush under the table. Instead of looking at something to fix, they they accept and understand that it's complex code that they don't like. They don't like having to write, and they know it could have issues. And I'm very excited about the roadmap for Monero. I'll be honest. Like after going to Monerotopia, um, and hats off to the organizers, Doug Tuman and his wife for running the show. Great, small but great event because you get to talk to these people kind of one on one in person. Super excited about the roadmap on multiple fronts. One, that front, the fact that they are heavily pushing for full set anonymity. And then two, something that isn't talked about much in the privacy space, which is the ability to make highly private a highly private protocol that's actually very usable on light client devices. So
Mm-hmm.
if you use Zcash, no, it sounds like
Oh
you do
yeah.
use Zcash well. I'm guessing you're not running a full node and hitting command line commands to send out your Zcash, or maybe you are,
No.
you know,
But I'm also
right?
not using Edge either, unfortunately.
Well, Edge is useless with Zcash right now,
Yeah.
right? It just completely doesn't work. And that is the heart of the problem I'm mentioning is that most privacy coins, you don't know what transaction is yours on the chain. So what do you have to do? You have to scan the whole chain. And
Mm-hmm.
there's ways to compress the chain. Zcash compresses the blocks, what they call compact blocks, but you still have to go and get the compact blocks. And if you've been offline for a week, what Zcash is, I think it's is it 2 minute block time, or is actually no, it's like
One
Bitcoin
and a
10 minute block,
quarter. It's one and a
one and a
quarter.
quarter.
Man.
So 1.25 minute block time. Do the math. That's how many compact blocks you then have to download, over the course of a week of being offline. And then it's very complex cryptography to then go and take the compact block, determine you have a transaction in there, then grab the full transaction, off a full block. All of that just takes time. Monero has a similar issue, no question about it.
Mm-hmm.
But there's what I call a balance of compromise of a little bit of privacy to make it usable. The MyMonero team kind of created that first initiative with the MyMonero API, where you give up the known input amounts to your transactions,
Mm.
but you don't have to sync. You don't have to see every single block. A node, a server can determine what transactions are yours. And then now, what excites me about the roadmap for Monero is they're now coming out with a a feature, and I think it's the next hard fork slated for Q3, Q4, where you won't even have to give up a view key anymore. You won't have to give up knowledge of the input amounts that go into your wallet. Now you just share what is kind of like an address, right? It's kind of like an address. It's a tag. You share that with a server, and the server can send up your fully encrypted transactions with no knowledge of what's in those transactions, no idea what are the source inputs, what are the outputs, the amounts, what addresses you're sending to or receiving from. That to me is the holy grail of privacy and usability. And I've been pushing for things like that within other privacy coins, Pirate Chain, Zcash, and whatnot. And it doesn't seem like it's anywhere even close to being on the roadmap. But of course, when one leads the effort, others will follow. But it's exciting to see the Monero core team kind of leading on that effort from both a usability and privacy point of view. And really, there's compromise there. But I think the compromise for what they'll have in maybe a year or two will be unbeatable. Like that's the best you can get, right? No sync time, instant, discovery of your transactions, fast sends, and there's no server that knows anything about it'll know what transactions are yours and nothing else. That's it. But who cares if you know what transaction is yours if you can't tell what the hell's in it?
Yeah, of course.
Right? And so just want to give you, I went on a bit of a rant and soapbox about the importance of that, but that's what makes me excited about the roadmap for Monero, even though, right, this whole discussion came about because, their decoy selection, suboptimal, had exploits in the past, but they're looking at improving it. They've got a good roadmap for it. So I'm very excited about it. At the point that they have like ZK snarks and they have these view tags, I don't know what's left to say. Like what's there left that would put them behind any other chain as far as privacy usability is concerned.
I guess we'll see when it gets implemented. Monero's almost 10 years old, I guess, with, getting up to the 10 years old. And for the entirety of this time, is to my knowledge, has been using the decoy model. And the decoy model just, I'm just trying to think of like I was hiding from like a state level actor, and every single time one of these bugs has cropped up over the years, as the Monero devs have rightfully lamented, the selection model has been the most annoying part of that. I can just imagine my anxiety going through the roof of like, oh no, because of just the amount of data that gets, leaked by using it, even though it is obfuscated. And I've kind of been like watching this kind of thing from afar a little bit over the last many years. But I do remember when Zcash was created, and the one thing I think is really interesting with cryptos is when you're talking developer versus developer, there's very much like, I guess, agreement, and like there's not a lot of conflict there, because it's like men and women of science, right? People who are just working at their best at these kinds of problems and acknowledging this and that, blah blah blah. But then there was just a giant community battle where there's just a lot of like mudslinging, kind of, it's gone a lot on kind of both sides, and it's kind of interesting to see kind of where this is going, where it's all going, all roads lead to zero knowledge, as the privacy gold standard kind of there.
Yep. I mean, Zcash obviously led that effort. They took, at the time that Zcash was founded and at the time that Zcash launched, to my knowledge, there was no implementation of zero knowledge proofs other than in research papers. And so they took research papers and actually turned it into a cryptocurrency. And so you got to give them credit for that, and for better or worse, though, the cryptocurrency space mandates basically open source and visibility. And so those ideas can get taken and used in other protocols. And, Monero now has the freedom to be able to take some of those ideas and utilize it inside of their protocol.
Yeah.
And, it keeps you about as honest and as innovative as you possibly could be, because you constantly have to innovate. Right, you can't ride on your laurels. That's what I love about open source. You can't just sit there and go, let me just put a 20-year patent on it. Although Zcash did put a patent, unfortunately, which is highly, highly criticized for them having done that.
I don't think that's going to last, honestly, the bootstrap license thingy. But it's kind of interesting because you got, first of all, a lot of people have criticized the dev fund idea, like Blockworld's going towards a developer fund, and it is what it is. I
I'm
don't
fine with
criticize
that.
it,
It is what it is. Like, I don't
but
really think
it's
that's
funny
that big
because a
of a
lot
deal
of the
because
same
it's
critics then end up implementing the technology that a different chain's dev fund kind of did. So we need one overall. It's like the sides project, but also, as you mentioned, it's not enough to just come up with something cool. You got to take it to market. And
yeah.
what I think is relatively unquestionable at this point is in the privacy focused space, Monero's had the best success in taking the end product to market. It's
Yeah.
so it's
It's
kind of like
from my opinion,
well,
it is
you
the only
develop,
privacy by default coin, and that's the biggest criticism I've given to a lot of other privacy-based projects
but not just
is that
that,
they're
to
not privacy by
get
default.
adoption out there, to get used in services, to get things like that. And so when you
Um, I don't think they did that much of an effort, though. Did they? Like, who's they
I see
even
it
in the Monero community? Like, and
with the
what do they
community.
do to get it adopted? It's just broad community. There's not an
Hmm.
entity. There's not a hardcore entity behind it. And I think the reason why the community did adopt it for actual use in goods and
Hmm.
services is because it is private and private by default, and it's usable. It has
Yeah.
usable options. So, like my Monero made it very, very usable for people that are like, okay, I'm okay with this view key compromise. I
Hmm.
can, but it becomes a usable currency. And I think the like Pirate Chain, Zcash, and many of the others weren't willing to make what I call like that necessary compromise. And in the kind of cypherpunk movement, there's been a list of technologies that don't get adopted because of the classic, um, they let perfect be enemy of the good, right? They
Of
just
course.
wanted it to be absolutely perfect. And there was no way to do that without major usability compromises. So we didn't even get the good. The internet is an example of that. Email is an example of that. And we have no encrypted standards of email. And that's because people, couldn't agree on how to do the public key sharing. All
Hmm.
right. The best example of what we did get adopted was SSL. Now we could have typically done SSL we could have done email in an SSL fashion, and we could have had encrypted email. All right. SSL took on the compromise. They said, okay, we're going to have these kind of trusted pub key servers, and you'll trust them at least in the public key sharing, but they're not going to hold your private key. Right. That private key means you're fully encrypted when you're talking to that server. And so I'm a firm believer in finding that balance. And most coins hadn't, and I feel like Monero is the closest to finding that balance. Doesn't mean the other ones can't get there. I think Litecoin's actually on an interesting, really good track on getting the usability figured out. One of the biggest problems with Mimblewimble, I think the reason why all the Mimblewimble coins have absolutely died is user
Hmm.
experience. If people aren't aware, in order for you to send and receive a Mimblewimble transaction on either Beam or Grin,
Hmm.
the sender has to be online at the same time that the recipient has to be online, and they have
Yeah.
to figure out how to send this packet not on a chain, but in some weird side channel over to the recipient. And then it has to then come back and forth a few times. And then it goes to the quote unquote chain. And then now you've received the money. So that's what's called an interactive protocol. And it's a real pain in the butt. It's one of the biggest challenges for Lightning adoption for peer-to-peer payments other than peer
Absolutely.
merchant, right? Peer to merchant's fine because the merchant's always online. But peer-to-peer is a big challenge for Lightning, although they do have interesting proposals that'll fix that. Now, Mimblewimble, getting back to Litecoin, David Burkett has proposed something that the math is above my head. I can't attest to this. So smarter people than me can look at his proposal. A proposal that fixes Mimblewimble to make it non-interactive, meaning you can just simply have an address, you go offline, someone can send money to it, and boom, you're done. If he's truly succeeded with that, they have a golden ticket to, once again, amazing level of privacy and usability. Well, they do still have this one flaw. It's the flaw that Zcash, Firo, Pirate Chain have, which is it's not by default, right? You have to explicitly go and use the MWeb balance that you have that's separate from your Litecoin balance. I think that can hinder adoption pretty drastically, and especially hinder adoption by people that really, really care about privacy. So if they can move to a fully MWeb ecosystem and effectively deprecate the standard transparent transactions, now they're on the track of Monero. And this is basically me giving you a 5-minute answer to, how did Monero get such broad adoption?
Yeah.
Usable, privacy by default.
Yeah.
Those two things. Like you get those, I feel like and plus it was the first, right?
I'd
So the
argue,
first that was
I'd even
like,
argue those two are the same thing, right? Is that by
mm,
default, those
not
kind of,
necessarily.
have to.
You could do privacy by default, but you could do privacy by default, but you got to run a command line to send and receive your transactions, and you have to sync the entire chain and read full blocks and not even have compact blocks, and then you die. No one's going to use you, right? So they found the balance of both, and that's a key piece that I'm hoping other privacy coins start to adopt and see. Like, hey, why was Monero successful? If you take those two things, I fundamentally believe those are the two reasons.
Yeah.
Those other chains start to adopt it, then I think we're on a good track. Anyway, we're over on time. You got to go to another podcast, right?
Yep, absolutely. So
right
cool. Now
I got to actually get some work.
It's shill-o'clock. Shill your stuff. Where do you want to send people?
Where to send people
Twitter,
into the land of privacy? You guys go get privacy coins. You go use them. Go use Signal. All right, keep yourself not doxed for the stuff you don't care about doxing. How do you do that? I still like Signal, even though mobile coin. And of course, I do like using privacy coins on Edge, with the exception of Zcash, because we need an updated software development kit from the ECC team, which they are building. So for now, Monero on there. So yeah, people check it out. Edge.app. You can follow us on Twitter. I think a little bit on Instagram, mainly on Twitter. Go to our website. I'm on Twitter as well, @Pollinator with 2 L's. Although I mostly just lurk, occasionally post here and there, especially when something's upcoming, like a podcast with Joel.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thanks very much for being on. Dash Boss podcast next. Otherwise, see you guys next week. Peace.